All right, everyone, welcome. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. People will keep streaming in the next few minutes, but I think let's get started. So again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Today is a very special evening. We're joined today by Daniel Ellsberg. As you all know, Daniel Ellsberg is a very prominent figure in our communities. He released the Pentagon Papers to the public, and in doing so, he risked his freedom and his life, really, and profoundly impacted our national discourse and our foreign policies. So again, in doing so, he risked his life and his freedom. So he'll always be very special to all of us. Along with releasing the Pentagon Papers, Mr. Ellsberg, of course, was involved deeply in the U.S. government and in U.S. nuclear war planning. He's written a book about his experiences called The Doomsday Machine: Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner. So we'll be talking about the book tonight. We'll be talking about nuclear weapons tonight. This event tonight is sponsored by Peace Action affiliates in Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, Maryland, the Western New York Peace Center, Chicago Area Peace Action, the Coalition for Peace Action, and New Jersey Peace Action. So thank you to our co-sponsors for co-sponsoring this event. Thank you to everyone for joining this event tonight.
I'm watching it now.
And a big thank you to Mr. Ellsberg. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
What a pleasure. And I see some other faces here. I know Jackie Cabasso, Bob Gould, and Felice Cohen-Japa. Great, old friends.
Great. So we're really looking forward to this discussion. Dan, so again, the book is The Doomsday Machine, Confessions of a Nuclear War Planner. If anybody here hasn't already read it, I'd highly recommend it. I think it was a great book. We had a question prepared about the book, but then coincidentally, just yesterday, an interview with you was released. And many of us listened to the interview. I heard you talking about the sorry, one second here. Yeah, I heard you talking about these ground-based ICBMs and the plans to upgrade them. And you mentioned something about how Northrop Grumman had spent over $100 million in the last couple of years lobbying for these ground-based ICBMs. To basically for the government to spend our tax money, to take our tax money to upgrade these nuclear weapons. So many of us were curious. We wanted to ask you, what will it take for peace activists and groups like ours in our country to overcome the military-industrial complex to basically end nuclear weapons?
Well, my own hopes, perspectives about that are actually a lot more alive or vigorous today than they were even a few days ago. I read a report put out by Bill Hartung, Hartung, who has long been an expert that I've been in touch with on the role of the military-industrial complex, the military-industrial congressional complex, or as my friend Ray McGovern calls it, let's see, Mickey Matt, the military-industrial congressional, intelligence, and so forth. It goes on, think tank, academic, they're all involved. But above all, I was very struck that this report is on inside the ICBM lobby. And very unusually, not for Hartung, but for other people, it specifies the people who are standing in the way, people and institutions that are in particular standing in the way of any significant disarmament. And I would have to say that in the nuclear field, up till now, there hasn't been what I would call significant disarmament. We've actually dismantled more than 80%, maybe 85% of the warheads. And yet, considering that a couple hundred warheads are creating firestorms on cities will create a nuclear winter around the globe, just sent by one side or both, a couple hundred, maybe 100, will loft smoke into the upper stratosphere that will cut out 70% of the sunlight and within a year exhaust global food supplies and kill by starvation nearly everyone. So a nuclear winter capability you could call near omnicide, using John Somerville's term for killing everyone. Well, people focus on the question, is it total extinction or not? And actually there was a new book, if you saw that other thing interview I gave, I actually referred to it recently in the London, what was it, the New York Review of Books, I think it was, that looked at the problem being things that would cause total extinction. And since he decided reasonably that nuclear winter would not cause total extinction, nor would the climate change, he brushed them off the table as things to worry about and looked at the possibilities of artificial intelligence or biowarfare, possibly robots and everything else. That might actually finish us all off. So he focused on that, which is ridiculous. Okay, so Hartung points out that basically a handful, and in this case, looking at ICBMs, Northrop Grumman, which is the sole major contractor, the main contractor now for the new so-called ground-based strategic deterrent, the replacement to the Minuteman III, the brand new ICBMs, basically, which will cost in their production and their initial installment about $100 billion, but over the period of their lifetime, $250 billion, 249 billion. That's pretty precise number there, not 250, $249 billion on something that should not exist at all. In fact, something so dangerous that it would be worth spending that money to keep it from existing. If you had to do that, if it took that, and it's not enough to get rid of the GBSD, the ground-based new ICBM, you have to get rid of the current ICBMs, the Minuteman III, 400 of them, which constitute the hair trigger on the doomsday machine. They're the element of the force that presents the president in case of a tactical warning, which, of the kind we often get falsely, 10 minutes or so to decide whether to end most human life on Earth. And that's because of the ICBMs. Use them or lose them, launch them or lose them. Getting rid of them, that would be worth $100 billion. And you know, you could almost, if it were all salary, if it were all, workers' pay, yes, it would be worth to put them all on the payroll for a year of transition while they find other jobs, and you train them and you move them if necessary. Even give Northrop Grumman officials their bloated salaries rather than produce these things, to keep them in. Okay, I would have said even a week ago literally, that I saw no prospect for getting rid of those ICBMs. That Biden, when I looked at his foreign policy team, I didn't see that happening. Neither the Democrats nor the Republicans, with a very few exceptions, like Bernie Sanders, Barbara Lee, have talked about reducing the defense budget at all. Certainly, it was not a part of the campaign, and it really never has been for a long time. So I didn't, it wasn't going to change. I saw myself as living with that threat, whether I live another year or another 10 years. The maximum. I didn't see that likely to change. When I see the Hartung thing being so specific and detailed about the effects of the lobby, and not just think tank people who are spinning out propaganda and marketing rationales for these weapons, but the people who have suitcases full of cash, basically, or in any case, campaign donations, jobs for the people in the military who make the requests for the missiles that they then get to satisfy and so forth. And then I put that together with the fact that there are a few people who are pressing to end the ICBMs, and that this is a time when the public might focus on that. Frankly, I was looking at a possibility of a campaign against ICBMs a year ago. And there were op-eds on it and so forth. People like former Secretary of Defense William Perry has been saying this for years. A former head of the Strategic Command, Cartwright, James Cartwright, who's in charge of the ICBM, said, get rid of them. No effect, no attention. Op-eds in the New York Times and whatever. But a year ago, I thought, you're not going to get people to focus on this, during a campaign. And then the pandemic came along. It seemed impossible. Well, now the president, at last we have a president who is working on the pandemic. So it's not totally up to us now to figure that. He's even addressing the climate problem, not adequately yet, but still he's on the case. It is imaginable that we could get public attention now for ending the hair trigger ICBMs and here's how the way Hartung puts it, as a first step. First, eliminating the funding, eventually 100 billion, eventually 200 billion, for the GBSD, kill that. They talk about reducing it, but I'd aim higher than that, killing the money for the GBSD before it gets unstoppable. When enough money is put into the development and deployment of these things, there is no experience with stopping them. They're in effect unstoppable. Too many people involved in the states, the 30 or 40 states that they have building these things, etc. Too many congressmen have been bought for it by this. It's got to be stopped now. And then he does say doing that as a first step toward the elimination of ICBMs. Yes, absolutely. And by the way, Adam Smith, the head of the House Armed Services Committee, now Democrats, has been for getting rid of the ICBMs for a while. I've talked to him about it. The only trouble being he's got 59 members or so on that committee, and they mostly don't agree yet. But even though Adam Smith is, as Hartung shows, you'll see in his pie chart, is one of the major recipients of money from the military-industrial complex. He's head of the Armed Services. It was before the minority. Even so, he is against it, the ICBMs. So we have something to work with there. And I am in a totally different mood from what I was just days ago. I am now thinking we do have a chance to get rid of that hair trigger, and then it takes longer, to disabuse people of the myths that have kept this whole arms race going for 60 or 70 years, actually, since Hiroshima, but certainly since the 50s. That will take longer to get them off, but we'll have a start. Whereas if we commit ourselves to building new ICBMs for 30 or 40 years, nothing can really happen on either side. It turned out that work on climate, exclusively, that existential threat, because we'd be committed on this. But you're hearing me say now, I'll tell you actually that I really do see a real chance to do that this appropriation season. So you asked, that's a very long answer, but it's the key question for this group, which is there something for us that we can actually hope to achieve of great interest, of great progress? If we can get rid of the ICBMs and as a first step, stop this new funding, that is a basis for moving the hand of the doomsday clock back. And there hasn't been anything else like that for a long time. And I can't point to any other single thing that would do that way. Changing the Cold War atmosphere right now, and of course, work on climate would have some good effect there. Good effect. But this one, I would urge the Bulletin of Atomic Sciences to say, if you can get on the way to moving the ICBMs back, you can move that clock back. And that's more than symbolic.
Great. Thanks, Dan, for that. That's great to hear your thoughts about that. Next, I want to bring in some of our co-sponsors for comments and questions. But first, really quickly, just to follow up on something you said, uh, based on your the information available to you, what is your assessment or opinion of President Biden's and his relevant cabinet members? What do you think their policies will be towards nuclear weapons?
I'm sorry, I have to ask you, Biden and his, I didn't hear the, and
His cabinet
oh,
officials.
well, there's a big split as far as I can see. Not surprisingly, but actually encouragingly, the domestic side looks not only incredibly better than Trump, which is a pretty low bar, but actually seems very good and better than people expected, better than I expected, and in a lot of respects. I'll name one, by the way. He came back to his old roots of unionization in talking about directly encouraging the unionization of Amazon, which could be a very big thing across the country. And I didn't sort of foresee that he would be that good. And of course, his rescue bill that just passed is better than most people expected it to be. So good. And in other respects, you can go across the board. I didn't expect him to be much better than either Obama or Trump on foreign policy or defense. And for his first month, my expectations were not being exceeded. The people he put in are essentially the Obama people. Somebody said to me the other day, gee, they look like Obama people. I said, well, there's a reason for that. They are Obama people. They were in the administration in most cases, and that's not good enough. Granted that on Iran and Cuba, he looked good. But on defense matters in general, he had supposedly, we hear from inside by leaks, good impulses to go for no first use, even to get rid of ICBMs, but they didn't go anywhere. So I wasn't expecting much, and it doesn't look very good, much better than Obama yet at all, if any. We'll see. It's evolving. He had the pandemic in particular, and other things to look on the first month. What will his relations with China and Russia turn out to be? Calling Putin a killer, which is true, but when you're not willing to say that Mohammed bin Salman is a killer, is not wonderful. Actually, our need to cooperate with Saudi Arabia is not comparable to our need to cooperate with Putin and Russia. Saudis don't have nuclear weapons, and are not potent. Actually, neither of them look very promising on climate. Actually, they kind of both go out of business if the oil stays in the ground where it should. So, as my friend Arjun Makajani said, one problem with climate control is that if we do what we should, which is keep it all in the ground, Russia goes bankrupt, along with Saudi Arabia and maybe Venezuela and so on. So that is actually a problem. But our immediate problem, of course, is having Exxon, our own Chevron, our own companies here, putting them out of business. Now, is that easy? No. What could be harder? You're talking here about the strongest, most rich corporations in the world. And they've been very effective in keeping, hell, half the country doesn't believe there's a climate problem. Thank you, Exxon. Thank you, Chevron, the others. They're very good at myth making. That is extremely dangerous. So far, I wouldn't say that we have a very promising cabinet on the national security side or the foreign side, the external side. But again, who knows? Pressure may make the difference there. There seems to have been, the Republicans, by the way, are pointing to left-wing pressure on this policy, which, during the campaign sounded absurd. On the domestic side, it seems to be working to some extent. So let's do it on the foreign side. Let's see what we can get. We need better people. But they need pressure. Used to say they may not see the light, but they'll feel the heat.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, that was great. Okay, next up, I want to pass the floor to David Boris from Chicago Area Peace Action. David.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us. I am unbelievably encouraged to hear you open this meeting with your hopefulness for an opportunity to actually dismantle an entire leg of the nuclear triad. So my question for you is, as we start to move the chess pieces around and need to have a conversation with moderate folks in the electorate who don't normally think about nuclear weapons issues, do you feel like, well, we feel like, and I'd like to hear your thinking on this, that a place to start is start by pushing hard for a congressional declaration and a presidential declaration of no first use. And armed with a no first use policy, I think we can make the case to the electorate that the entire land-based leg of the triad is a first use weapon. It's not a retaliatory or a defensive weapon. So if you could speak to sort of the strategic thinking around that and whether you agree or don't.
Yes, when I was working with Physicians for Social Responsibility, Jesus, a long time ago now, 25 years ago, in 1993, 94, 95, I remember going to one of the weekly lobbying meetings, somebody saying, "Here comes Mr. No First Use," when I came in the room, because I was always the one adding this to the agenda and emphasizing it, and they would put it in, but I had to mention it. People weren't as enthusiastic about that as I was. So, as being practical or having anything. Now, something that has to be faced is, of course, we should have a no first use policy, yes. What ran into that when Obama wanted to get it, actually, and he was confronted by his Secretary of State, Kerry, Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, and the Department, I forget what they called him, a head of energy, I guess, yeah, Muniz, who had the control, in charge of building the weapons, actually, all against it. And I don't know what Muniz's problem was, probably people at the labs working or something. But Kerry and Carter both came in, said, our allies, we haven't prepared them sufficiently for this. Now, this is 2016. Actually, Obama had been for this, at least as early as 2013, hadn't pushed it. So now in 2016, he was making, I think, said, no, the Japanese and then the Eastern Europeans, the Poles and Baltic states and so forth in NATO, are against this. And oddly, the British were against it. I can't entirely rationalize that. But anyway, they said they were. And so, in other words, our allies. And these people who benefit supposedly from the nuclear, quote, umbrella, that is the threat by the US to blow up the world if they are endangered. Nothing short of that. And, blow up the world, I keep emphasizing, is not total extinction, it's just near extinction. And that's our promise to them. We'll kill everybody, nearly everybody, if you are endangered by a conventional attack, that would be the first use part, or by a nuclear attack. And, you get a nuclear weapon on you, a tactical nuclear weapon, we will kill everybody, nearly everybody. So that's the basis of our foreign policy for a long time, meaning, what do we get out of that? And the answer is we get a kind of economic hegemony in NATO and these others, or at least we get in on their conferences, and they can't do tariffs against us and hold us out of their economies and whatnot, because we are their protector. It's a protectorate. And yes, there's various economic and political advantages to doing that. What makes us a European power in NATO and in Europe in general? That we threaten nuclear war. Now, no first use means we take away that threat. Should they be threatening to blow up? Well, they want to, as a deterrent. It will affect our relations with them unless we provide some substitute, which should be possible. We should be able to have a sufficient influence in the world economically and every other way without preparing and threatening and rehearsing blowing up the world for them. We should not be making that threat at all, and nobody else should. But they can hold over us. I mean, people do, are like Kerry and the others. They say, oh, well, then Japan will want their own nuclear weapons. And they used to say Germany. It's a little hard to think that Germany now feels so threatened by Russia, as they could say plausibly 50 years ago. But Japan, Poland, Baltic states, should we be threatening if the Baltic states suffer the fate, let's say, of Crimea or something, to blow up the world? Well, they say, I would say no, sorry, not. They say, gee, why aren't we as deserving of that as your other allies have been for 50 years? And the answer can only be, but American politicians are not quick to say this, we were wrong then. It was an insane policy. It was an evil policy. Don't expect them to say that, but it was. And we're not extending it. I mean, we're trying, you should learn. We want you to learn why it's so bad. What do they know about nuclear winter? Let me guess, nothing. Our people haven't been told about it by our government. And have theirs? I doubt it. I've always asked myself, do the Europeans actually realize what it would mean if we carry out the promise that they keep insisting we make, that we respond to Russians with nuclear weapons? They all die. Do they have a good grasp of that? And I don't know the answer, actually. I suspect they just didn't think about it very much. But anyway, no, we should not, we should make foreign policy on a different basis from that. And of course, we can, but not just from one day to the next. As they say, they say we have to bring along Japan and these other countries. We have to change the prospect. The other thing, David, if I may say, when people say no first use, they are talking about what I'm talking about here, that in a conventional war, we might escalate to nuclear war or answer to a weapon on our allies. But actually what these first strike weapons that you talk about correctly are really allegedly for is to preempt. It's not to go first, it's to go second first. In other words, when you think that there's another, that they're about to attack you, then we preempt. That's all our planning, that's what the weapons are for. Why? To limit damage. Well, since we now know about nuclear winter, will it limit damage? No. It's a delusion, it's a hoax, it's a pretense, but it's very profitable to Northrop Grumman and Boeing, which dropped out of the race only because Northrop Grumman stole away the maker of solid fuel rockets, which was cooperating with Boeing, and Northrop Grumman bought it. And Boeing says, oh, we can't compete anymore now. They've got the solid rocket fuel. So they dropped out of the running. So they now have a single source. There's no open bidding. So Northrop Grumman they make a lot of money about preparing for this, even though it's totally infeasible. You cannot limit damage by attacking Russia. The world goes. And even before the smoke, without the smoke gets the southern hemisphere. But a war with Russia destroys us even without the smoke. So, but as I say, preparing for it, very profitable. The aerospace industry has relied on that since about 1947, having discovered that when their contracts ended in August of 1945, with the end of the war, they couldn't make it in the commercial market unless they sold a lot of planes to the government, warplanes. Now, to sell the number of planes they needed to keep afloat, you had to have a very big enemy. Couldn't be Germany, we were occupying Germany. Russia was the only place with enough targets in it to justify buying a lot of warplanes from Boeing and Lockheed and the others who needed the business. And it's been that way ever since, essentially. So we have to educate people, which shouldn't be that hard as a matter of education, except getting the audience is not easy, to the fact that the idea of limiting damage by striking first preemptively in a nuclear war is as much of a hoax as limiting damage by anti-ballistic missiles. We've actually managed to make people aware that ABM is a hoax with respect to war with Russia or even China now or whatnot. Counterforce, for which the MX, but then the Minuteman III, the GBSD, they're all based on hitting Russian missiles first. They wouldn't regard that as precluded by a no first use agreement. No, this is defense. This isn't initiating nuclear war. They're about to initiate a war. We're just getting the drop on them, like high noon. That's all. And you can't get away from that as long as this delusion of that striking first is less bad than striking second persists. And it persists because it's a very, very profitable delusion for these companies. So that's why I'm so enthusiastic about Hartung. He is focusing on them as a political target, as a change. It isn't just thinkers like Henry Kissinger or whoever who are in the think tanks who are doing this stuff. It's people whose income depends on making everybody believe this myth that although nuclear war must never be fought, as Reagan agreed, it shouldn't be prepared for either. The myth that it's worth preparing for, it's worth striking first, it's worth building new accurate missiles, improving the accuracy of Trident missiles, for example, which serves no purpose other than the totally delusional notion that hitting their missiles will limit damage when their submarines can cause nuclear winter. So I'm saying, yes, no first use is worthwhile, but I think a lot of education, I used to focus on that above all. Now, right now, I'm saying get rid of the ICBMs and do both. By the way, the Hartung recommendations do call for no first use. Actually, they put that at the head of their recommendations, and that's I go with that. But by itself, it won't do the job.
Thanks, Dan. Speaking about no first use, I shared a link in the chat where, and I'll share it again just now. If people click on the link, they can send a message to their member of Congress asking them to support no first use. Thank you, David, for that question.
Think about a message too to get rid of ICBMs, okay, if you would consider that. It can't be too soon on that.
Sure thing. Good suggestion, Dan. To support one thing you said, I just want to support one thing you said that, I myself did not know what nuclear winter was until I joined Massachusetts Peace Action. I learned so much from our activists and our leaders here, and I've learned so much from your book on this issue. So thank you so much for writing this book to help educate us. So that was really great. Next up, I want to pass the floor to Martha from Maine Peace Action. Martha.
Good evening, and it's so nice to talk with you. Peace Action Maine had a few questions, but I see so many people lined up with multiple questions. I'm just going to ask one, and that is, do you think that Reality Winner should be freed?
Yes. Just going to surprise you. I've been giving such long answers, but when you mentioned how many people are lined up, I was just, as I heard that, I was thinking, I really got to shorten them here. But anyway, Martha, that is susceptible of a short answer. Yes.
Well, Dan, a couple other people, they had questions about your thoughts on Edward Snowden and Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. So I guess could you share your thoughts with us a little bit about whistleblowing and, Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning, and I guess just share with us some of your thoughts. And I think is it correct that you've called on people within the government to continue whistleblowing so that we could continue to get information to the public?
Well, of course, I've been doing that for half a century now. This is the 50th anniversary of the Pentagon Papers in June. And I would say all that time I've been saying, and I learned to say it in the following way after a while: don't do what I did. Don't wait till the bombs are falling or another thousands of people have died. If you have information that could avert a war or shorten a war, or information that our Constitution is being violated, as Ed Snowden discovered, or many atrocities are being committed, as Chelsea Manning revealed, think right now, don't wait, as I did for years, in effect, without thinking about it, but I just didn't come to think in time of what I should do. Act like Catherine Gunn, who, when in England, who the day that she realized that, as she put it, her government was using illegal means of surveillance to get us into an illegal war, she thought one day about it, and then she gave that to a newspaper with the chance actually of averting that war. It didn't, but it could have and should have. So I'm saying act in a more timely way. And certainly, of course, Chelsea and Ed both acted much younger than I was. I mean, with less experience, but they did the right thing. And we need it right now. I was saying very much in December of this last year that after the election, that if anyone knew of plans for possibly provoking Iran into actions that would be said to justify our attacking Iran. And I am sure that such plans exist on paper and on computers. Not for definitely doing it, but to be prepared to provoke a war with Iran. They should consider putting that out in a way that might avert that war, even whatever the cost to themselves personally. As Ed is experiencing Snowden, permanent exile, undoubtedly. Chelsea Manning, 7.5 years in prison. I got off without paying any significant price by a kind of miracle, but I was facing 115 years in prison. And would that have been worth it? To avoid war with Iran, which would be, at best, even if it didn't go nuclear, if it were on the ground, worse than Iraq, Vietnam, Afghanistan all put together. And that seemed like, and I think it was, a real possibility. And by the way, others seem to think that too. 10 secretaries of defense put out a letter, and this was unprecedented, telling the military, reminding them of something I think almost none of them would have otherwise remembered, that their oath of office called for support and defending the Constitution, not the president, not secrecy, but the Constitution, and that they should not obey unconstitutional orders, which they didn't spell out. I think they were thinking of Iran, there's indications, but we have not gotten one page of evidence of that. And I say that believing with high confidence that such pages were there to be revealed, and still are. And that the risk of war with Iran now seems enormously less now with Biden in. And yet this team of his, which people asked me about earlier, seem to be dragging their feet on getting back into that agreement, which could let it slip away, since Iranian elections are coming up and Iran has its hawks just as we do, who don't want that agreement. And to let that one get away because we won't lower the sanctions until they've done this or that would be inexcusable, and unfortunately not highly improbable. That's a terrible thing to say. Under Trump, of course, my worry was war. With Biden, not so much, but it would be inexcusable. He campaigned on getting back to that agreement, and yet, as we see, it's not assured. So we need whistleblowers. We'll always need them, and we need a lot more than we've had. We need more moral courage than we've seen from any of our officials other than Ed Snowden and Chelsea Manning and some other people who have made important revelations without revealing themselves, but not enough. And otherwise, moral courage in the sense of taking a risk in your own life to save other people's lives, the lives of, quote, others, not us, not we, them. To risk your life for them turns out for civilians to be very rare, and we need more of it.
I think you're right, Dan. And I think that moral courage you were talking about, you really demonstrated it by risking everything to give this information to the public. So I think that type of moral courage of trying to, of being willing to risk your life for the sake of others, I think it's really rare. And I think it's a really special person who's able to do that. In the way you did, and Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning.
If I may say, I've never been convinced or shown really that the people who do that are special persons. What's unfortunately true is that what they're doing is very special, is very rare. It doesn't seem to me, either for me speaking myself or the others, that it's easy to identify how they are different as persons. But I can say that doing that, taking that kind of risk, which does show moral courage, by definition, is contagious. And when you attribute it to me, it would never have occurred to me to do what I did without the direct example of people like Randy Keeler and Bob Eaton, who were going to prison nonviolently for draft resistance, and they had that effect on me. I'd be glad to pass it on to anyone. And really, people like, for example, the Vets Against the War in general, who had a very big impact on public opinion and so forth. In other words, were they all that different from their buddies who didn't throw their medals over the wall, who didn't take a risk with their careers? And you know, it's you do the right thing at a particular time. It makes me think of Kerry, who spoke for all those vets at the in May Day, testimony before Fulbright Committee, when he spoke to the atrocities that had been done in Vietnam by people like himself, and raised the famous question, you know, how can you ask a man to be the last man to die in a wrongful war? I forget if it was a lost war or something. Anyway, he hasn't always shown that same degree of moral courage later. Now, he's now in charge of climate, which is very good. I'm glad to see it. And I hope he remembers his past.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I think you're totally right that these are special acts and we all have that potential within us.
I think everybody is capable of it. That's my impression. And really, the example is very helpful.
Sure. Okay, next up, I want to pass the floor to Reverend Bob Moore from the Coalition of Peace Action. Reverend Bob.
Thank you, Amar. And Dan, it's great to be in your presence. You know, I remember being at events with you going back to the 70s, and you've been a great champion for these causes for a long time. I want to speak just a few moments about empowerment, and it really leads into what you were just advocating about eliminating the land-based nuclear missiles for the US. So I was involved, as you may remember, as one of the early leaders of the Nuclear Freeze campaign. The nuclear arms race had only escalated up to that point. And, huge organizing happened across the whole spectrum of nonviolent action using the classic tools of democracy, petitions, lobbying, mass rallies, et cetera, et cetera. And over time, that actually did get results. It just isn't instant. That's one of the big challenges is you don't get instant results in this organizing. But we launched the campaign in 1980. And we never did get the freeze per se to even get a vote in the Senate, by the way. It never passed the United States Senate. So the freeze per se as a policy proposal never got approved. It never came. But we created so much pressure that Ronald Reagan was forced back to the negotiating table. And that over time, once those negotiations started and Gorbachev came into power, it led to the first nuclear reduction treaty in history. And we've had more since then, 1987. We've had the START agreements. And so I think that overall, we've made good progress. As you said at the opening, we've reduced the world nuclear stockpiles over 80% at this point. That is something. The problem is we still have overkill. And we still have the danger of nuclear hair trigger, as you said, very powerfully as well. And so one thing that the nuclear freeze did that I think is a parallel to what you're proposing right now is we said, well, we can't get the whole package. So let's go for the first 1/3 of the package, which was a freeze on nuclear weapons testing. And that got traction too. And it became a political centerpiece. And so by the time that Bill Clinton was elected president, he was a champion of that as he campaigned. And he found that people really liked that. The one thing we often underestimate as organizers is that most of the public doesn't like nuclear weapons. They very much want us to get rid of them. And they say, why can't you government leaders get your act together and negotiate the elimination of them? Well, that's unfortunately beyond reach right now, although I think that the nuclear ban treaty at the UN is a great signpost of hope that, we need to kind of keep that in front of us as the eventual goal, because that's the only thing ultimately that will protect us from another use of nuclear weapons. And as you said, once they're used, then we're in an omnicide situation, the universal destruction of life, probably. So I think that the parallel is by focusing on that first 1/3, we found a piece that was manageable that could be achieved. And it's true that the US Senate never ratified that test ban treaty, although Bill Clinton was the first world leader who signed it. So we're still obligated. But what really got traction was a very smart move in the US Senate, where they said, you've got to stop funding for nuclear weapons testing. You can't spend money to do nuclear weapons testing anymore. And a part of that was connecting it to the super collider that George Bush really wanted for his re-election campaign. So, I've seen really amazing things happen. And I agree with you very strongly. By the way, Professor Frank von Hippel has an outstanding article in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists on exactly this, eliminating ICBMs. And remember that when the New START Treaty, our latest agreement in 2010, when that was agreed to, the military itself said we could go down by another 1/3 beyond that. Beyond the 1,550. We could go down by another 1/3 on our warheads and still have a more than adequate deterrent. Well, that's almost exactly what we would be eliminating if we got rid of the ICBMs. And we're eliminating the danger of hair trigger, because the reason there's a hair trigger on is we're worried that if we don't use them or lose them. If we thought we were under attack and didn't launch them, and, it's just crazy to be living like that. It's a hair trigger on nuclear war. So I think eliminating those saves, as you said, $250 billion. And the other thing that I think is sort of behind the scenes is this is understandable. Just like we were stuck when we were opposing nuclear weapons, but before the nuclear freeze came along, we were too much voices in the wilderness, and people weren't really saying, they were saying, that's not realistic. How can that ever happen? Once the freeze came along, God bless Randall Forsberg, who I knew well, what a brilliant proposal that was. Once that came along, the people said, hey, that makes sense. I want to get engaged. I want to support it. And millions of people did. And so I think we have the same potential with eliminating the ICBMs as the big next step toward our ultimate goal of the global abolition of nuclear weapons. So again, one of the things I respect about you the most, Dan, is you don't just talk the talk, you walk the walk. And I know you've been arrested at Rocky Flats, you've been arrested at Lawrence Livermore. You are right there. When things need to get done, your conscience, your body is right there. So I just say thank you so much for your outstanding leadership over these many, many years.
Thank you, Robert, if I may call you Robert more.
Bob, Bob's fine.
Bob, I remember you very well from the freeze, and you were
Yeah.
walking in front. You were the vanguard, the point. You were walking point on the freeze, okay? And, as you were speaking, it reminded me, and this is very closely related to what I've been talking about, not obvious stuff altogether here. To launch any of these weapons as a precedent for starting nuclear war would be catastrophic. But any weapon that was launched first or second would actually have no good effect, only murderous effect depending on who the target was. But if it is a city or something like that, mass murder, no way around it. One weapon. That's true of all of them. However, some are more dangerous to the world than others. And that's why I've been focusing on the ICBM. Their vulnerability to attack is what creates this absurd discussion of the last half century. Can we increase the amount of time the president has for deciding on war from 8 minutes to 10 minutes to maybe 12 minutes, something like that? That's crazy. That's absurd. And the reason for it is this notion that the ICBMs, if there's going to be an attack, they're the first targets and they are vulnerable to the other side because of its accuracy and so forth. So getting rid of them is even more important than getting rid of a comparable number or even a large number of, let's say, submarine weapons, also murderous, also which have to come down enormously in numbers, but they don't force the president or anybody to say, oh, we're about to lose our force here. The ICBMs do. Now, the exactly comparable thing to that in 1980, 81, 82, as we went toward the Pershing II in Europe, was the most accurate weapon in the world, and it was about 6 to 12 minutes away from targets in Russia. Not 30 minutes like an ICBM. Moscow, by the way, our people said it can't reach Moscow because in our tests, we hadn't quite done it at that length. The Russians didn't wholly believe that. And, rightly so. I mean, the idea that the Pershing couldn't quite reach Moscow was ridiculous. And so what that meant was that without any warning at all, they were faced with, quote, decapitation. And moreover, you had a weapon there that was forward-based, so that again, if there was any movement into West Germany, which was the premise of our NATO planning, those weapons were likely to be captured. And so for the others, the pressure to use them right away, like other tactical nuclear weapons, very great. But especially their accuracy and the threat that they posed to Moscow was extremely dangerous, meaning that given a false alarm, such as did happen with Russia in 1983, on I think it was February 26th or so, during a tense period for the Russians, Vladimir Petrov in Russia gets the word that there are American missiles coming in. he chooses to lie to his superiors and say that it was a false alarm. What he really thought, as I had a message from, was 50-50. It may be, it may not be. And he chose not to tell them that truth because he knew they would preempt. And they would preempt in particular because the Pershing II was facing them. And as a matter of fact, okay, so the Freeze got rid of the Pershing IIs. And so everybody took part of, gee, isn't this wonderful? These are the first missiles that have been destroyed at all with mutual verification, not just a symbol, it's a whole class of weapons and so forth. Very little attention was given to what I was very concerned with. They weren't just any weapons. These were the most dangerous weapons in the world. And they had the Russians in a panic, practically. So it made the world much safer to get rid of all those, and the SS-20s too, but they didn't matter. SS-20s in East Germany, the Russian equivalent was not in range of Washington or LeMay, Offutt Field, headquarters and so. It was not remotely as dangerous and destabilizing as our Pershing IIs. So that was a very big achievement, much more than can be measured just by the numbers that were involved. And as I say, the ICBM has the same characteristics right now, and always has had. Behind the Pershing II, there always were our ICBMs, another hair trigger. It was just that Pershing II was a filed down hair trigger, just terrible. And so, yes, you can't tell what the ripples may be of these actions. The Freeze, by the way, you mentioned the Senate didn't get to a vote. I think I just read yesterday, not remembering it, that it failed in the House by one vote. Can that be true? I just read it yesterday. Amazing. Who was that vote? That would be interesting. But yes, there was a time when the public was relatively informed by the Freeze movement. Yesterday in an interview, if you heard that, I mentioned nuclear winter, and somebody rightly, Katie Helper, rightly said, tell us what nuclear winter is. Don't assume people know it. It's true. So well, we didn't know about nuclear winter during the Freeze, not till 83. But in 80, 81, 82, we didn't know about it. But people did know, and I won't go into it now, people did know the difference between an A bomb and an H bomb then, which they don't now, almost nobody, or before it. But during that, PSR had told people what a 1 megaton of a bomb would do in your city, here and here and here. And they understood at last what they were really facing. And even so, now here's finally, if I don't want to end on a bad note, but we're not ending, we've got some other things. I do have to say this about the Freeze, which I was totally devoted to. By the way, I believe that, tell me if I'm wrong, Peace Action, I think, is the heir to
Yes,
a combination of SANE and the Freeze, right?
correct.
And
Correct.
okay, so that was my total thing. By the way, I mentioned Randy Keeler earlier as having inspired me by going into prison. Well, when he got out of prison, he was pressing for the referendum on the Freeze, and of course, it was more or less invented by Randy Forsberg.
Yes, it was. That's right.
And so forth. Had wonderful sponsors and whatnot. One of the most distressing, dismaying things in my life was this, no hyperbole. After about 87% of the public favored the Freeze, which is a figure you don't get to if you ask people who is the vice president, now, or generally. 87%, impossible. They gave a landslide to Ronald Reagan. And when I did the arithmetic, I said, that must mean that half of the people who were for the Freeze voted for Reagan. What the hell is this? And it did introduce me to the fact that they did agree with us, but it wasn't their priority. And as you were speaking, I was even thinking, there was a time when they really were well informed, but it wasn't their priority for things. As we've seen in the last year, with the 70 million people voting for Trump, the public is part of the problem. The
Yes.
public, not as they might be, but in a state of ignorance and education and fear and propaganda that they actually do experience, it's not quite enough to be a whistleblower and sort of give them the word. It takes more than that. And we'll need more than that. How you get that change. But at any rate, the Freeze did a job of education then, which I think is a prerequisite to getting this change now. We got to see that again. And we couldn't have done it in the last even 4 years. Nobody was focusing on it. There was a shock a day, and no major figure was talking about nuclear weapons at all. I think now people rightly are concerned about climate. And even so, we haven't got the action we need. And they do know. Half the country knows. Half doesn't know. As my friend William Gibson, the playwright, used to say, sometimes the audience is the flop. And a lot of the audience for Trump was the flop in the last 4 years. And we can't change that very quickly, if at all. The question is how to do it. But I was, I was looking here for a note that I found just the other day. As I said, I'm very encouraged.
While you're looking, Dan, let me just add one PS to my empowerment message.
Yeah.
And that is that we just had a meeting within the last week with Representative Tom Malinowski here in New Jersey. He's now the vice chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. And Professor Von Hippel actually helped us put forward the idea of banning ICBMs and getting rid of them. He was remarkably open to that.
What's his name again? I didn't hear.
Tom Malinowski, Representative Tom Malinowski. So I feel very hopeful. I'm with you. I think this can get done.
All right. Speaking of Frank Von Hippel, there's two things in my book that are at the top of my recommendations in the last chapter of my book, The Doomsday Machine. And the first one is an official investigation of the actual impact of carrying out any of our war plans. That is, including the smoke, which they've never done. In other words, an investigation of nuclear winter, and whether there's really any difference in the effect of any of their major so-called options. They all have the effect of nuclear winter, the major ones. That's what I wanted to find out. Well, that was my number one priority for many years, thanks to Von Hippel. And I won't go into all the details. He just explained it to me. There is now an inquiry going on with the National Academy of Sciences starting January 1st this year, of my highest priority there, of getting that study done. And the second one was ICBMs, getting rid of the ICBMs. And so, the thing that I've wanted for so many years is actually happening. Frank played an absolutely critical role in getting that. And maybe we'll get the second. Keep at it, Robert.
Well, thank you, Dan, and thank you, Reverend Bob, for those comments as well. And before you, also thank you to Martha from Maine Peace Action for her question as well. Dan, we had a question from Mass Peace Action member, Assistant Director Brian Garvey. He has a question for you in regards to the Afghanistan papers. And
in regards to the what? To the
the Afghanistan papers.
Oh, yes. Right.
And so the question is basically, the Pentagon Papers, they had such a huge, profound impact on our discourse in our society. It seems that the Afghan papers did not. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, there's a fast one. You're right. It's true what you just said. Now, the Afghan papers showed at the field level and sort of the mid-staff level that they understood very well they were making no progress and there was no prospect of making any progress. And the Pentagon papers showed that at the highest level. It's a higher level than the Afghan people had access to. The Pentagon papers had no effect on Nixon's policy. They affected the American public's attitude toward the war quite significantly, but they were already against the war. And Nixon knew that, and that wasn't keeping him from pursuing it. And a year after the Pentagon Papers, which were in 50th anniversary is June 13th, 1971. Now the 50th is 2021. A year after, in 72, was the heaviest bombing of the war, leading in December to the heaviest 2 weeks bombing in human history of Hanoi and other places. So that looked as though there had been zero effect of any of this on the actual policy. Now, just go ahead. At that point, when I was very, very discouraged, the reality was Nixon had already taken crimes against me in 71, and 72, which when they were revealed in 73, faced him with impeachment, conviction, not just impeachment. And he had to resign, and that made the war endable. That was unforeseeable in early 73. After a landslide election, one of the biggest in history, the chance that Nixon would be out of office was not low, it was zero before 77, which is impossible. Like the Berlin Wall coming down as of, let's say, 83, that it would come down in 89, impossible. Yet both of those happened. And they happened as a result of, various people working at the impossible, one way or another. In the case of Vietnam, Nixon's concern that I would reveal information about his policy, which I was revealing, but I didn't have documents, and his fear that I would reveal documents led him to take crimes against me to shut me up that were actually amazingly revealed. Unmistakably, and he got caught for them. He wasn't the first president to do stuff like that, or the last, but he got caught while he was still in office, and it confronted him with conviction. So you can never tell, as I said earlier to Bob, what the ripples from these things would be. Now, on the Afghan papers, here's a difference. It's grim difference in a way. In terms of public attitude, the Pentagon Papers did catch people's attention because we were in a war where, let's see, in 71, we still had, I've forgotten exactly how many, but a couple 100,000 people. The next year, big offensive. Let's see, I could tell you, in 69, in 68, we lost 15,000 men. All this time we're killing 10 to 1, when it comes to Vietnamese for dying and refugees. 15,000 in 68. Instead of the war ending in 69, which it would have under Humphrey, I believe, by the way, now looking back, but people thought it might under Nixon, didn't end. 10,000 died. Same number as 67, the year before Ted. That's 69. 70, about 7,000. I think, again, the same as 66. He was going down at the same rate we'd gone up in terms of this. So the point is, we were still losing a lot of Americans. In Afghanistan, losing hardly any Americans, very few. What's the problem? Well, the problem, we're bombing Afghans, we're killing Afghans, we're causing refugees, we're causing total ruin. Here's the sad thing. Americans can live with that for a long time. They've lived with it for 20 years in Afghanistan. Had Vietnam gotten down to where Nixon wanted it to be in 73 and more or less achieved without Watergate, where our only contribution is air power, the Vietnam War could have gone on for another 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, whatever. When will Afghanistan really stop? Biden comes in to end Afghanistan, and today he says, going to be tough to carry out Trump's schedule of getting them out by May 1st. Well, all right, logistically, that might be somewhat tough, whatever, that's what he's saying. So he says it'll be delayed a little more. How much more? His team doesn't want him to get out any more than Trump's team wanted him to get out. So we'll see what happens there. So that's the answer to your question. We've gotten the Afghan war down years ago to a point where we're only killing Afghans, not losing Americans. And I wish I could say that that portended we'd get out of it, but it doesn't. So, however, after the American troops got out, after they got out, the Americans did act as if they had some care about the Vietnamese. They didn't want to keep bombing them. And the Indochina Peace Campaign and others did help to keep the money off. And that made the war endable. And that could happen now if people understand. We don't have the right to kill any Afghans or Iraqis or Somalis or any of those. We don't have any right to kill any of them. And we should be out of there.
Thanks, Dan. I agree completely. So I'm going to take this opportunity, speaking of the Afghanistan war, just to plug in an event that Mass Peace Action is organizing for Saturday. It's the anniversary of the Iraq War. We're doing a webinar like this one with a lot of great speakers, including Danny Shurden and Phyllis
Oh.
Bennett and others.
He's very
So
good.
I've put that in the chat. Okay, all right. So please do.
I'd like to meet Jamie Shurden. He's a terrific spokesperson. He is somebody, of course, who's been speaking out tremendously from inside. He's wonderful.
Yeah, he's great. We
Former inside.
follow his work very closely. So Dan, I guess the next question for you will be, I mean, there's so many, like what to choose from. I guess one of them is in your book here, The Doomsday Machine, you talk about how at the end of World War II, when Nazi Germany was defeated, that a lot of people in the government and in the armed forces, they wanted to basically hype up the threat of the Soviet Union to justify an independent air force and to justify increased budgets for their agencies and whatnot. So, I mean, a question for you is: do you see something similar happening now with China? Are they ramping up the threat of China for a new Cold War? What are your thoughts about that?
Yes, in a word, and Russia as well. I can't see any reason for the Cold War that we've renewed with Russia. Cold War now, the demonization, that they're our enemy. People use the word enemy, rival, adversary, and whatnot in terms of interest. Comparing Russia, for example, to Hitler, Nazi Germany when it comes to Crimea, which is, not just inflammatory, but, crazy. And what is the purpose of that? And I can't see any other purpose than to sell weapons to our government and to the governments of Europe, because I think the crucial main reason for expanding expanding NATO into the border of Russia, to the border of Russia, Poland, Baltics, all the others, Hungary, than to sell them weapons to get them up, quote, to NATO standards. And enormously provocative, which people like Kennan in his last days said the greatest mistake in American diplomacy, for as you can remember, quite rightly, very dangerous, warned against it by Russian leaders. And I think just as weapons salesmen, we are the preeminent weapons sales person in the world. Russia's second, and by a lot. So likewise, I think hard to sell Trident submarines against Osama bin Laden, or new ground-based strategic missiles against terrorists and whatnot. No, you need a Russia or a China. And China, until very recently, was just the future marketing point for us. It just wasn't building up. Now they are building up to a certain extent, still 1/10 of what we have in nuclear weapons. And Trump, of course, was already saying, then we can't make agreement with Russia until China comes in on it. China saying, are you kidding? We have a minimum deterrent here, 1/10 of what you have. You don't need to talk to us till you get down to our level, which we should, and which we should do unilaterally. By the way, Robert Moore, something you said earlier, yes, they said, the JCS said we could get down from the 1550 weapons. which are in New START, to 1,000 safely. Well, now that, and you said, quoting them, that it's for deterrence, we'd still have a deterrence. That change has, the idea that you can't get below 1,000 has nothing to do with deterrence. It has to do with our current target system, which is every major Russian, every significant Russian military target, with the Air Force regarding many of those military targets as being in cities. So it's not a no cities policy. It's command control, airfields, air bases, missiles, air defenses, transport, and so forth. They're in cities, but that's for disarming. Well, what's the use of disarming when you can't disarm their submarines at sea? Answer, well, it's no use in the actual war or in the destruction, but it makes a lot of difference to Northrop Grumman, and I should say Boeing and Raytheon, General Dynamics, and Lockheed, the big five. Makes all the difference there. It has nothing to do with deterring. Even the official rationale is limiting damage, which it won't do. In other words, it has exactly the effect of building a lot of ABM, anti-ballistic missiles, against Russia. And by the way, Russia says, we're not going down any further as long as you have ABM in Romania and Poland and that area, anti-ballistic missiles, which can quickly be converted into Pershing IIs. You can make them ground-to-ground missiles instead of ground-to-air, which is true. And they say, so as long as you have what amounts to Pershing II on our borders, we're not going down any further. Do they have to have that? No, but they have a military-industrial complex just the way we do. For money now. Used to be for bureaucratic power under the communists. Same now, same motives that they do. They make money out of it. And they have to do it too. I think it is probably true that we have to go down together. Both sides have said to their people for so long, we can't be, quote, inferior to the other. It's a total propaganda, sales pitch, but hard to get out of people's heads fast. So I think we kind of got to go down together.
Thanks, Dan. Someone in the audience was asking, could you describe your book a little bit for those of us who might not have read it? I guess, why did you write it? What message do you want the readers to take away?
Well, you've heard a lot of the message here. I'll just say, read it. Let me tell you, it's worth it. If you're interested in this subject, it's which you are for being here. Anybody who's listening to this would seem to have enough interest in it that it's a good book for them to read. I'll say that, and I won't make much of a pitch otherwise. You've heard a lot of it. I do say, okay, here's the difference. By the way, what's our schedule? What's our timing on this? How long is it? Where are we
I mean, we're scheduled for 8:30. I think we could run over a little bit if that's okay on your end.
Yeah. Fine.
Okay.
I just wanted to know, what do you think?
Sure.
I start the book with a revelation that I had in the month of actually pretty close to my birthday, when I was 30 years old. Now I'm approaching my 90th birthday. So almost to the month, this was 60 years ago, when I got a piece of paper in my hands in the White House from the Deputy National Security Aide, Bob Comer. That was the answer by the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the question, how many people will you kill? How many people will be killed? I put a passive voice. If you carry out your current war plans, which were first strike preemptive plans. The Air Force has never looked forward to striking after there has been a surprise attack on them. It was possible the Russians would have a surprise attack, but that would be so catastrophic that their plans have always assumed that on the basis of warning, they will preempt a Russian attack. So it would go first with their undestroyed missiles against the Russians. how many will die in Russia and China because in those days, and I don't know how different it is now, actually, there was no war with Russia without war with China. The idea was, we're not going to destroy each other, US and Russia, and leave China intact, in charge of the world, then communist. No, we got to wipe them off too. And is that different now? Will that be different if there's a war? Not the way we've been talking for the last couple of years. All of a sudden, China is still communist, but it's also capitalist. And nevertheless, I don't think we plan to leave China running the world then after the US and Russia destroy each other. I just put that out. Thought has not occurred to me before. But in those days, it was Russia and China, Soviet Union and China. And the answer came down. I'll just give a quick answer. It's a little more detailed in the beginning of the book. 600 million people we would kill with fallout and blast, radiation, and whatever else. That didn't include smoke. Actually, it didn't even include the fire because that was supposed to be so hard to calculate. So if you put the fire in without knowing, not worrying that where there's fire, there's smoke, and it might even go into the stratosphere, with the fire, it was going to be 1 billion people. A third of the Earth's population was then 3 billion people. So we were going to kill, with fallout, our own allies in West Europe were going to go. And that presented me with this issue. The people who'd done that planning and were answering these questions, not the Joint Chiefs, but the colonels who wrote the plans, were people I had lunch with, dinner with, my colleagues. I worked with them all the time. And they knew that they were preparing to kill a third of the Earth's population. What's going on here? Now that gave me, and this is what I wanted to convey to the readers in this book, that gave me a sense, not just of Americans or military planners, but of my species. I didn't think these people were special monsters. I knew they weren't any more than I was. Now, what I was doing in retrospect was participating in a monstrous planning, no question about it. But I was trying to reduce the number of people who would be killed unsuccessfully in the war. My thought was, if Americans are capable of making this plan and preparing to carry it out, it was for an operational plan for this year over Berlin, for example. It wasn't some hypothetical plan 10 years from now. This is the way human species is going to end because they're not going to change this. If they could do this in 1961, are they going to refrain from carrying these plans out eventually for some reason or other? Well, I still live with that question. I'll tell you this, I think it's unlikely. I think it's unlikely that humans will survive these inventions or the climate change. Catastrophic climate change in the next 10 years or so, if we don't keep the oil in the ground. Is Exxon going to keep all their oil in the ground? Are we going to make them do it? Who's the we who's going to do that? We, with our voters, with the influence in Congress, compared to the influence of Exxon and Chevron and BP? And how about Putin, whose income, I mean, their national income depends on oil in Venezuela. Is that going to happen? Probably not, I think. So we have catastrophic climate change ahead for us. Not necessarily the full, as worse as it could be. It's going to be bad though. How about nuclear? We've gone 70 years without actual explosions on people. I think that was kind of miraculous. I think it wasn't foretold. It doesn't show there was no danger, as some people would like to think. I think it shows it was a miracle, like the Berlin Wall coming down was a miracle. It did happen. Could be another 70 years, another miracle. Why not? Well, you can't count miracles very well. So it's possible, but not likely. So I looked at our politics in the last 4 years, which is definitely dismaying to me at 89, almost 90 now. I learned things about my country and the electorate, ideas that I thought were fringe ideas that are not fringe ideas. They are large minorities of our country who are seriously racist. And by that, I mean not everyday racism, but I mean slave owning racism. Very simply. About a third of the country, I think, has the values of the Confederacy, very simply. And always has had, it turns out, which I had managed to remain ignorant about until Charlottesville, when I began studying it more the last 4 years. Okay, that's not good. And almost elected, came within an ace of electing Trump again here. How many votes would it have taken? Somebody said 20,000, somebody said 70,000. 70,000 votes differently, and we have Trump for 4 more years. Let me say, I wouldn't see any hope for climate on that problem. It wouldn't necessarily be worse on nuclear than Biden or Obama, but that's, bad enough. No chance of reducing it, I wouldn't see. We came that close to that in this country by a free election. And we have 80% of Republicans in the belief that Biden got fewer votes in the swing states than Trump, that Trump is the actual true president, and that we are looking at an illegitimate president right now. And so when I read today that the FBI regards domestic right-wing violence as the major threat of terrorism, why not? If you're not pacifist or near pacifist, which I am, nonviolent, if you're not nonviolent, which I am, what should you do if an illegitimate government is running your country that has stolen an election? That's what they believe. So here then, what we've seen in the last year above all is right in front of our eyes, the possibility of massive public delusions. I just got a book here, very interesting book by William Bernstein, The Delusions of Crowds, How People Go Mad in Groups, by William Bernstein. Very, very interesting. And it goes into a lot of old examples and new examples, including the premillennial dispensationalists who are a major part of Trump's base, the evangelicals who believe in the rapture and believe that an Armageddon will come within our lifetimes, their lifetimes, before 2050. Let me be very specific. At least 20% of the public, and possibly much more, up to 40%, believes that the Messiah will return, Jesus Christ will return by 2050. Along with Armageddon, they will be raptured, but the Armageddon will involve, by God's will, and as part of the necessary prerequisite of the millennial rule of Jesus Christ on earth, the necessary part, billions of people dying. Now, that belief does not make you a candidate for the Freeze campaign or for an anti-nuclear campaign, and that's no joke. Reagan believed this, definitely, very much. How can you worry very much about killing 600 million people if Armageddon is God's will? Now, I call that's a religious belief, a very dangerous belief. Well, have we seen some other dangerous beliefs? How about the pandemic? Believing the president that it's about to go away, you don't need to use masks, you don't need social isolation. How many hundreds of thousands of deaths in the last year are due to that hoax? But is it a hoax? I think from all the indications, Trump believed that. But the people who believe it, why shouldn't they believe it? They hear it from Fox News. They hear it from everybody on Fox News and from the president, again, like Trump winning the election. Why shouldn't they believe it? Well, they do believe it. Here's the theme. I was asked about the book. Maybe I can more or less end with this. The notion that we need the capability and the readiness to use it of at least 1,000 nuclear warheads against Russia for the last 70 years. We didn't all have that many until about, actually we got up to 1,000 in 1952 under Harry Truman, mostly aimed at cities. He didn't know it, but that would have caused nuclear winter and we wouldn't be here. I mean, nobody would be here. The notion then has been a mass delusion and a hoax. There are people who had served, who benefited by it, who can point to benefits. They would say, even for the country, there are benefits at the risk of causing this. And even without nuclear winter, causing 1 billion people to die right away without the smoke. Okay, so the delusion that first strike is better than second strike. Go into the strategic command and it'll be hard to find a colonel who doesn't believe that. There will be some who don't believe it, but keep their jobs. And generally they're taught that. First strike, plausible. First strike has to be better than second strike, doesn't it? It sounds plausible. Wrong. It's not the case, but there it is. Sells a lot of weapons. Okay. Is there a chance of getting away from this? Well, here's what I was looking at. I couldn't find it. I just saw it today in a little notebook that I make notes to myself of what to do and messages I have and so forth like that. And this was a very unusual note. It's the only time I've ever made it to myself. I was trying to describe, I'm often asked, what's your basis of hope? And what I say is, it's not impossible that we can change course on this. It's not impossible. How do I know it's not impossible? I know it's not impossible because our prediction isn't that good. Uncertainties, impossible things happen. And I mentioned some good ones, I didn't mention Mandela becoming, without a violent revolution, becoming head of state in South Africa. And I could mention others. I've hinted at this, but I'll just mention it. To me, it was a miracle that the war ended in 75 rather than 77 or later. Okay, so these things happen. That's why I work. I act as if there's a chance. But how much, and I know that's possible, so I keep at it. How big a chance? I couldn't see any way that Congress was going to be changed. I couldn't see any way that our policies were going to be changed. I didn't see Biden's cabinet, which I had some hopes for. I would have no hope with cabinet with Trump, but Biden, I hoped there would be more. Didn't see it very much. So I see that I wrote on March 14th. What is it now, the 18th? My mood could be called despair. I don't see any way out of this. And I was thinking even at that time, that's not going to stop me. I'll keep doing what I do, keep in hopes it'll change. But truthfully, if somebody knew what's in my head, I couldn't blame them for saying it looked like despair. And yet that was the 13th. And on the 16th, I read Hartung's piece and I read some other op-eds on this. And I thought this may be the time, unlike last year. And I told what I was saying to Patricia and she said, I'm actually seeing a way ahead where we can actually reduce the risk here. I didn't say this, but in effect, we can move that hand on the doomsday clock back validly without being unrealistic. And she said, I haven't heard you talk like that for a long time. And I said, I haven't felt it for a long time. Now, what I was looking for was, that was just 2 days ago. And 2 days before that is when I wrote, I don't think I've ever written those words before, but it's hard to tell my state of mind from despair. Well, I'm not feeling that kind of despair at this moment. You're getting me at a good time here. So I'll end with this. I think we are on the Titanic as a species, not just as a country. And I'll add one thing here, and make that a little clearer. I've studied the Titanic because I study disasters since I've been trying to avert disasters for so long. What was the chance that the Titanic would go down on its maiden voyage? Not worth thinking about, just negligible. Does that mean because it was unsinkable? Many people thought that, but the builders knew it wasn't. I won't go into all the details, but the builders knew they had made provisions. This wasn't unsinkable, but it was pretty unsinkable, close to it. They get the word on the Titanic, first maiden voyage. So for the honor of the voyage, the richest people in the world are on that ship. They could have been on any ship, but no, they traveled from New York to England to be on the first maiden voyage coming back of the Titanic because it was so luxurious, such a big deal. It was advertised as the biggest. It was the most advanced piece of machinery in civilization. It was. And it was the most luxurious ship, and so forth. So they get the word, as do other ships, that there's ice ahead, further south now than they've had it for many, many years. It's a danger now they don't normally face. Don't even know how big it was. Okay, so there's ice ahead. They have some choices. Other ships stopped dead in the water till the morning. That's what they did, no problem. One or two went south to avoid the ice. Another one went ahead, but very slowly so they could be sure they would see anything ahead. The Titanic kept up its top rate of speed on a dark night, in the middle of the night, heading toward the ice without going south. It went a little bit south, but not very far. Full speed ahead in the dark. And they scraped an iceberg. Now, why did they do that? 100% for commercial reasons. The head of the line was on that ship, and we don't know that he gave actual orders to the boat's captain, ship's captain, to keep full speed ahead on the same course. But we do know that that captain wanted to, it was his last voyage, he wanted to be on the board of that line after this voyage. The owner of the board was on the ship, and they wanted to make a speed record. They hadn't advertised a speed record as the fastest boat. They wanted to show, surprise, we're not only the most luxurious and most advanced piece of machinery in the world, it's the fastest. They couldn't do that if they stopped in the water, and they couldn't do that if they went south. So they went straight ahead into the ice and surprise. You know, they didn't have enough lifeboats for everybody. They knew that, and so forth. We are on the Titanic. We are going full speed ahead into ice on the climate and on nuclear weapons. But, and we may have to some extent hit an iceberg when it comes to climate, irreversible things, but it won't be the ultimate irreversible. On nuclear, we haven't yet hit it. So we have a chance to mutiny and to stop this vessel, stop this course, and change it. Change that course. How big a chance? Not as big as the idea of democracy would suggest. Not as big as as Bob was saying, the 60% or so who want less nuclear weapons and so forth. That doesn't give it to you, but it doesn't mean we don't have a chance, and it isn't worth trying. And Georgia, if I talk about miracles, why not call Georgia a miracle? 2 senators, a black and a Jew in Georgia? That's as good a miracle as you need in political life. And look at the work that had to go into that and did happen. And without that, you know, forget it. My earlier mood of the 13th would be justified, you know, close to despair. But that's not the way I feel now. And looking at this crowd, you know, which I have, it's the wonder of Zoom is I can see a whole bunch of you at once. wonderfully, better than I could if you were in an audience. So the wonderful faces, you have all been involved in right livelihood. I sense that for all of you since, from your background here, and I know it of several of you personally. So we're in this together, and let's turn the ship around, okay?
Thank you so much, Dan, for those comments. That was so inspirational, and I think your hope is contagious. So thank you for that message to us. You talked about you're going to keep doing what you're doing, and I hope you keep doing what you're doing for the next 100 years as well. So
No, let's talk about feasible goals here.
well, I think on that note of hope you left us with, we will wrap up the program now. So I will take this opportunity to once again thank our co-sponsors of this talk tonight. That includes Massachusetts Peace Action, of course, Maine Peace Action, New Hampshire Peace Action, Maryland Peace Action, Western New York Peace Center, Chicago Area Peace Action, the Coalition for Peace Action, and New Jersey Peace Action. So I know we have people here from all different areas in the country. Please do support your peace action, your local peace action affiliates. Chip in a few dollars if you can, or donate your time. It's so valuable. It helps us put on programs like this. It helps us lobby our members of Congress. It helps us organize rallies. So thank you so much to everyone who joined us tonight. Thank you again to Mr. Daniel Ellsberg. I just want to plug in Dan's website in the chat here so people can visit his website if they so choose. Once again, please check out Dan's book if you haven't already, The Doomsday Machine. I loved reading this book. It was a real page turner to me, and I learned so much. So thanks again, Dan, for writing the book. Dan, real quick, you mentioned, I really loved your message about how you said the moral courage that many exhibited, including Edward Snowden and yourself and others, Chelsea Manning, that potential is within all of us. But I think you were the one who actually did it. So I just think that's so admirable and so noble. And you continue to just talk about nuclear weapons and write about them and try to make the world a better place as you see it. So you're such an inspiration, even to people of my generation. So thank you so much. And the last thing I'll note here is just we were talking about wars and endless wars, Afghanistan and Iraq and others. Once again in the chat, here is a link for an event organized by Mass Peace Action on Saturday. Lawrence Wickerson, Colin Powell's chief of staff, former
very
chief
good.
of staff, he'll be
Very
speaking
good.
there as well. We have some great speakers. So everyone, please do check that out. Dan, are there any last words you want to leave us with?
Well, that's it. Okay, just tying on what you just said. Look, I said the Pentagon Papers had no effect when they came out on Nixon's actual policy, and a million tons of bombs dropped after that, and so forth. However, looking back on it, what Patricia and I did was one link in it which reflected, other actions, as I've said, by the many people. 5,000 people went to prison for draft resistance. 50,000 were subject to that risk, and even more didn't, weren't tried. But 50,000 were involved in some legal process on that. So we responded to that. We were one link, it turned out, in a chain of actions, every one of which was necessary to Nixon being out of office. To give an example of what I'm saying, if Alex Butterfield hadn't revealed the biggest secret in the White House, that there were taping in the White House, Nixon would have remained in office. If the special prosecutor hadn't, and if the Supreme Court, people elected by Nixon, appointed by Nixon, had not ordered him to turn over those tapes, et cetera, et cetera. There's a great chain, 50, 100 people, millions of people marched and voted and everything, but 50 to 100 at least did actions that were necessary, none of which we thought, any of us thought, would have any big effect in themselves. They were all necessary. And one made another's possible and so forth. That's what we're up to here. being one node in a network that has a chance of actually saving the world. Thanks for all being here.
That's absolutely right. Yes. Thank you everyone for being here tonight and for spending your time with us and for listening to Dan. So everyone, please have a great night.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Dan.